In the blistering heat of the desert, the jagged silhouette of forward operating Base Crimson stood like a lone sentinel against the endless horizon. Dust swirled relentlessly, carried on a dry wind that whispered tales of battle and loss. Amidst the hum of military equipment and the steady cadence of boots on gravel, a platoon scrambled under the weight of sudden enemy fire. The sharp crack of bullets and the distant thud of mortars fractured the scorching stillness, plunging the base into chaos. Sergeant Meyer Collins crouched behind the battered wall of a supply container, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sweat trickled down her temple, mixing with the grime of the battlefield. Around her, shouts and orders tangled with the sharp staccato of gunfire. She was young, too young, many thought, and had the quiet demeanor of someone who preferred to listen rather than shout commands. But beneath her calm exterior simmered a storm of determination. Despite the chaos, she scanned the field with a keen eye, noting the enemy's positions and the vulnerable points in their defense. Meyer had earned a reputation in the platoon, but not the kind that inspired confidence. To many, she was a liability, a soldier whose silence was mistaken for hesitation, whose cautious nature was seen as weakness. Sergeant Barnes, a grizzled veteran with decades of combat experience etched into the lines of his face, was especially vocal. He questioned her abilities openly, his voice dripping with impatience and disdain. "Get your head in the game, Collins," he barked during a recent drill, dismissing her suggestions as irrelevant. Meyer's presence was a source of frustration for him, a constant reminder that not every soldier fit his hardened mold. The assignment was clear: defend the critical supply route that snaked through the blistering desert, the lifeline for reinforcements and essential supplies. But the enemy had anticipated their movements, launching a sudden ambush that tore through the platoon's defenses. Panic rippled through the ranks, soldiers scrambling for cover as bullets tore through the air. Meyer's voice was quiet but steady as she tried to rally her squad, calling out positions and urging calm. She noticed a gap forming in their formation, a weak spot the enemy was exploiting. "Move to the left. Cover that flank," she called out, her tone firm despite the pounding of her own pulse. Her command was met with silence or dismissal. Sergeant Barnes, standing nearby, shot her a glare that could have frozen the desert sun. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, cutting her off sharply. "Stick to your position and keep your head down." The tension between them was palpable, a crack in the fragile cohesion of the platoon. Meyer clenched her jaw, swallowing the sting of rejection. Inside, a fire burned, frustration mixed with resolve. She refused to be sidelined, to be defined by the doubts of others. Her mind raced, assessing options, calculating risks. The supply route's defense was crumbling, and every second counted. Her thoughts flickered back to why she had joined the military in the first place. It wasn't for glory or recognition, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She remembered the long nights training, the drills where she had pushed her body beyond limits, honing skills that now felt vital in this crucible. Yet, here she was, overlooked and underestimated. "Sergeant Collins," her voice called out. Corporal Diaz, a young soldier who had quietly shown her support in moments past, edged closer. "We're losing ground fast. What do you think?" Meyer met his eyes, grateful for the brief flicker of trust. "We need to hold that ridge overlooking the eastern pass. It's the only way to stop their advance." Diaz nodded, but the squad around them remained unconvinced. The older soldiers exchanged skeptical glances, unwilling to shift their focus from entrenched positions. Meyer could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on her. Still, she held firm, knowing that hesitation would cost lives. The gunfire intensified, and the platoon's radio crackled with frantic reports. The enemy's numbers were swelling, their tactics precise and ruthless. Meyer's gaze darted toward the supply trucks parked precariously near the base's edge. If those fell, resupply would be cut off, and the platoon's survival jeopardized. She felt a surge of urgency, a need to act beyond the limits others imposed on her. But Sergeant Barnes was already barking orders, dismissing her input as distraction. "I'm in charge here," he growled. "Erin, I say we hold where we stand. No heroics." Myers' jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to make them see the risk in stubbornness, but the chaos left little room for debate. Instead, she focused on what she could control, her own movements and the small group of soldiers who looked to her with uncertain hope. She moved closer to them, voice low but firm. "Trust me. If we don't take that ridge, we lose everything." The desert sun beat down mercilessly as the platoon braced for the worst. Myers' mind was a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies, each weighed against the harsh reality of their situation. The weight of expectation, both external and self-imposed, pressed heavily on her shoulders. She was no longer just a quiet soldier in the background. She was a vital piece in a deadly puzzle, and failure was not an option. Amidst the thunder of gunfire and cries of wounded comrades, Meyer felt a quiet determination take root. This was her moment to step beyond the doubts and fears, to prove that beneath the silence lay a strength unyielding. The supply route was more than a line on a map. It was a lifeline for every soldier depending on their success. And she would fight to defend it, no matter the cost. As the enemy's shadows crept closer, the desert held its breath. Forward Operating Base Crimson was a crucible of courage and doubt, where young soldiers like Meyer Collins would be tested in fire. The battle was far from over, but in those tense seconds, a quiet resolve blossomed, a promise that sometimes, the most underestimated could become the greatest hope in the darkest hour. The ambush tightened like a noose around Forward Operating Base Crimson. Bullets ricocheted off metal and sandbags as the enemy pressed their advantage, their gunfire cutting through the desert's dry air with deadly precision. The platoon was pinned down, their formation unraveling as panic mingled with fear. Sergeant Meyer Collins remained low behind the battered wall, her breaths shallow, mind racing faster than the chaos around her. The critical supply route was no longer a distant objective. It was a desperate lifeline slipping through their fingers. Soldiers scrambled to reposition, some firing blindly into the swirling dust, others seeking cover with trembling hands. In the midst of it all, Meyer's voice cut through the cacophony, calm but urgent. "We need to pull back to the ridge. It's our only chance to hold them off." Her suggestion was met with silence, then scorn. Sergeant Barnes, standing rigid nearby, shook his head with a grimace that spoke of impatience and contempt. "Keep your head down, Collins," he snapped, voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. "You're not in charge here." Meyer's pulse quickened, frustration prickling at the edges of her nerves. It wasn't just the enemy fire that threatened to break her, it was the dismissal from those she fought alongside. The squad's trust was fragile, and Barnes's words were a chisel carving away at her confidence. But she refused to let doubt win. "Barnes, we're losing ground fast," as she said quietly, eyes locked onto his. "If we don't move now, we're done for." He scoffed, turning away to bark orders at another group of soldiers. The others exchanged uneasy glances, some hesitating between following Barnes's lead and heeding Meyer's warning. The air was thick with tension, thicker than the desert dust swirling in the fading sunlight. Inside Meyer, a storm raged. She battled the weight of being underestimated, the sting of being labeled a liability by those who should have her back. Her mind flashed to moments in training when her ideas had been dismissed, her quiet nature mistaken for weakness. But she knew better. She knew that survival in this unforgiving landscape demanded more than bravado. It demanded insight, courage, and adaptability. Amidst the turmoil, a crackling voice came over the radio. "Enemy reinforcements inbound, bearing down on our left flank. We can't hold much longer." The message sent a fresh wave of urgency rippling through the platoon. The supply trucks, lifelines for the entire operation, stood vulnerable and exposed. If they fell, the base's fate would be sealed. Myers' eyes flicked to Corporal Diaz, who had been quietly watching her, his expression a mix of concern and hope. He edged closer, voice low but steady. "Sergeant Collins, I think you might be right. We need to act." That small gesture of trust was enough to ignite a spark. Maya took a deep breath, wading through the storm of doubt and fear. Her knowledge of the terrain was her weapon. She had studied every ridge, every ravine around the base. There was a narrow ravine on the eastern side, a route the enemy perhaps overlooked. It could be a way to flank their attackers, to turn the tide. "I have a plan," Amaya said, her voice gaining strength. "If we can reposition through the ravine, we can catch the enemy off guard and secure the ridge. It's risky, but it's our best shot." The squad members exchanged wary looks. Sergeant Banzi's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he processed the suggestion. "That's a suicide run," he growled. "You're risking everything on a gamble." Meyer met his gaze squarely. Sometimes, the gamble is the only option when the alternative is certain defeat. The platoon's hesitation was palpable, the air thick with uncertainty. But Diaz stepped forward, nodding. "I'm with you, Sergeant. Let's give it a shot." Slowly, others began to rally. The desperation of the moment outweighed their doubts. Orders were whispered, weapons checked, and the small team prepared to move. Meyer's heart hammered in her chest, not from fear, but from the raw surge of responsibility. She was no longer just a quiet soldier on the sidelines. She was a leader, a lifeline for those who depended on her. As they moved through the swirling dust toward the ravine, Meyer's mind sharpened. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. The enemy fire had lessened slightly, but the threat was far from over. She scanned the rugged terrain, identifying cover spots and potential ambush points. Her training, often overlooked by her peers, now became her greatest asset. The ravine loomed ahead, a narrow, jagged scar cutting through the desert landscape. It was a treacherous path, fraught with hidden dangers and the risk of exposure. Yet, it was their only hope. Meyer led the way, urging her team to move swiftly but silently. The tension was electric, every shadow a potential enemy, every sound amplified in the stillness. As they advanced, Meyer's mind flickered back to moments when her ideas had been ignored, when her quiet nature had been mistaken as weakness. But here, in this crucible of fire and dust, she was proving them wrong. Her knowledge, her insight, her courage, they were the tools that might save them all. The enemy patrols were sparse but vigilant. Meyer's team hugged the rocky walls of the ravine, slipping past unseen, their movements precise. She issued quiet commands, coordinating their steps and positioning with a clarity that belied her youth. The platoon's morale, once fragile, began to strengthen under her steady leadership. Yet challenges surfaced quickly. A sudden burst of gunfire erupted from a ridge above, forcing the team to dive for cover. Meyer's voice rose above the chaos, directing suppressive fire and orchestrating a swift counter-move. Her calm under pressure inspired those around her, transforming doubt into determination. The enemy's reinforcements were closing in, the sounds of battle growing louder as the flanking maneuver unfolded. Meyer's mind worked furiously, every decision a matter of life and death. The ravine, once a potential sanctuary, now became a gauntlet they had to navigate with precision. Despite the danger, Meyer pressed forward, fueled by a fierce resolve to protect her comrades and prove her worth. The initial dismissals, the whispered doubts, they all faded beneath the weight of necessity and courage. She was no longer just a quiet soldier fighting to be heard. she was a force shaping the battle's outcome. As the team reached the crest of the ridge overlooking the enemy's flank, Meyer felt a surge of cautious hope. The ambush's momentum was shifting. The once crumbling defense was gaining ground. Her plan, born from knowledge and conviction, was beginning to make a difference. But the fight was far from over. The desert sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The enemy was regrouping, their determination as fierce as ever. Meyer's squad prepared for the next phase, hearts steeled for whatever came next. In the midst of gunfire and dwindling daylight, Sergeant Meyer Collins stood firm, a young soldier once doubted, now a beacon of hope. Her voice, once silenced by skepticism, now commanded attention. The battle raged on, but so did her resolve. The sun dipped behind jagged ridges, casting the desert in a bruised palette of reds and purples, but the battle at forward operating base Crimson showed no sign of relenting. The enemy's reinforcements were pouring in, their footsteps thundering across the sand like an ominous storm. Radio chatter crackled with urgency, reports flowing in faster than commanders could process. The platoon's grip on the supply route was tenuous at best, and every second tightened the noose around their survival. Sergeant Meyer Collins stood at the edge of the ridge, eyes sharp as she scanned the advancing enemy lines below. Her team had slipped through the eastern ravine as planned, turning the ambush on its head, but now the real test lay ahead. The enemy was regrouping, their numbers swelling, their intent deadly clear. The stakes had never been higher. A sudden burst of static filled the radio, followed by a voice that cut through the chaos. The enemy reinforcements are closing fast. We need to hold this line, or all is lost. The words echoed in Meyer's mind, each syllable a hammer driving home the urgency. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with a fierce determination. Corporal Diaz, standing close, exchanged a glance with her. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared resolve forged in the fires of battle. Meyer's thoughts flickered to the narrow ravine, the strategic advantage it had granted them, and the knowledge that this fleeting moment could turn the tide. Amid the noise, a message from Diaz broke through. Meyer, your plan's working. The enemy's flank is exposed, but they're rallying fast. We need to act now before they recover. Meyer's mind raced, cataloguing every detail she had learned about the terrain in countless hours of study before deployment. Here lay their advantage. The eastern ridge overlooking the supply route was a natural choke point, rugged and narrow, but defensible. If they could hold it just a little longer, reinforcements could arrive, if they made it that far. She turned to her team, voice steady despite the pounding din. We hold this ridge, no matter what. Use the ridges, the rocks, make every shot count. We've got to buy time. Some of the soldiers hesitated, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Sergeant Barnes, standing nearby, shot her a skeptical glance, his jaw tight with reluctance. He still doubted her, still saw her as an obstacle rather than an asset. But in that moment, even his eyes betrayed a flicker of acknowledgement. She was leading, and leading well. The platoon dug in, hastily fortifying their position with whatever cover they could find. Meyer moved among them, offering quiet words of encouragement, steadying nerves, and organizing defenses. Her knowledge of the landscape was invaluable, directing soldiers to vantage points that gave them the upper hand. But the enemy was relentless. Their counterattacks grew fiercer, waves of fighters pressing upward against the ridge. Bullets whipped past, and the clang of metal meeting metal echoed as Meyer's team returned fire. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Amid the chaos, Meyer's mind wandered briefly to the message she had received earlier from Corporal Diaz, a rare moment of encouragement that buoyed her spirits. He had been one of the few to see past the doubts, to believe in her instincts and knowledge. That belief was a lifeline, a reminder that she was not alone. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her gaze steely. Hold the line. Don't let them break through. As the enemy surged, Myers' tactical mind engaged fully. She ordered a strategic withdrawal to a secondary position when necessary, using the terrain to funnel attackers into kill zones. Her commands were crisp and clear, cutting through the chaos and lending order to the desperation. The platoon's morale, fragile in the early moments of the ambush, began to solidify. Soldiers who had once doubted her found themselves inspired by her quiet confidence and tactical acumen. Whispers of a Collins has a plan spread through the ranks, a subtle shift that bolstered their resolve. But the battle was far from over. Myers' body ached from exhaustion, her muscles trembling with fatigue, yet her mind remained razor-sharp. She knew the enemy was relentless, and every moment gained was a moment closer to survival. In a brief lull, she gathered her team, voice low but intense. We're turning the tide, but it's not over. Enemy reinforcements are still coming. We need to stay sharp and ready for anything. Her words were met with determined nods. Even Sergeant Barnes offered a curt acknowledgement, his usual scowl replaced by a grudging respect. As the sun slipped below the horizon, darkness wrapped around forward operating Base Crimson like a shroud. The desert night was no less dangerous. Shadows concealed threats, and every sound was magnified. Meyer adjusted her position, eyes scanning the blackened landscape, ears attuned to the smallest noise. The platoon held fast, their lines a testament to resilience and courage. Meyer's mind raced through contingencies. If the enemy broke through here, where would they fall back? How to minimize casualties? Her training in unconventional tactics whispered solutions, guiding her decisions. Amid the tension, Meyer's thoughts drifted briefly to her past, the rigorous training she had endured, the long hours learning to read terrain and anticipate enemy moves. Those lessons, once unnoticed and dismissed by her platoon, now formed the backbone of their defense. She glanced at Diaz, who nodded in silent affirmation. Together, they embodied a quiet revolution on the battlefield, a shift from doubt to trust, from hesitation to action. Suddenly, a sharp crack shattered the night as enemy forces launched another assault. Meyer's voice rose above the din, steady and commanding. Hold steady. Focus fire on the left flank. Her team responded, coordinated and fierce. The tide of battle shifted again, the enemy staggering under the unexpected resistance. Meyer's heart surged with hope, but she knew better than to let it blind her. The supply route, their lifeline, still hung in the balance. The battle was far from won, but the glimmers of victory were there, forged by Meyer's knowledge, determination, and the slow but sure acceptance of her platoon. In that crucible of fire and shadow, Sergeant Meyer Collins was no longer just a quiet soldier on the edge. She was a leader, a strategist, and a symbol of resilience. And as the night deepened, her resolve hardened. This fight was hers to win. The night air was heavy with dust and gunpowder, the stars obscured by swirling clouds of smoke and the distant flashes of muzzle fire. Forward operating Base Crimson was a cauldron of tension, where every heartbeat echoed the urgency of survival. Sergeant Meyer Collins knelt behind a jagged boulder, her rifle poised, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Around her, the platoon held their ground, eyes wide but steady, muscles taut with anticipation. In the cold light of the desert moon, Meyer's mind flickered back to memories she rarely shared, moments hidden beneath layers of quiet reserve. She recalled the grueling hours of her specialized training in unconventional warfare, lessons learned far from the dusty sands of this battlefield. The early mornings spent navigating dense forests, mastering stealth maneuvers, and honing survival skills that few in her platoon even knew she possessed. Those experiences had shaped her, forged a resilience that simmered beneath the surface. Her platoon, however, remained unaware of the depth beneath her stillness. To them, she was the quiet soldier who kept to herself, often overshadowed by louder voices and more aggressive personalities. Sergeant Banz's dismissive glances and curt commands were a constant reminder that her talents were underestimated, even ignored. But Meyer had learned to carry the weight of skepticism without faltering. Tonight, that hidden strength was about to surface. The radio crackled with static before a terse voice cut through. It commanded orders to hold position. No unauthorized movements. Reinforcements en route. The rigidity of protocol clashed with the chaos around them. Meyer's lips pressed into a thin line. Orders were clear, but the battlefield rarely bowed to rules. Her gaze shifted to Corporal Diaz, who returned her look with a silent question. There was an unspoken understanding. They couldn't wait for reinforcements that might arrive too late. The enemy was closing in, and the supply route was still at risk. Meyer stood slowly, her voice steady but firm. We can't just hold here and wait for backup. If we don't act, we lose the ridge, and with it, the supply line. Banzi's eyes narrowed, his voice low but sharp. You're out of line, Collins. We hold until told otherwise. She met his gaze evenly. Sometimes, the rules don't save lives. I've been where you haven't. There's a narrow ravine east of here. If we flank through it, we can catch them off guard. A flicker of surprise crossed Banz's face, quickly masked by a scowl. The others shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty to orders and the desperate need for action. Meyer's jaw set with resolve. I'm leading a small team. We move through the ravine, hit their flank hard, and open a path for the rest of the platoon. It's risky, but it's our best chance. A tense silence followed. Then Diaz stepped forward, voice steady. I'm with you, Sergeant. Let's do it. Slowly, others nodded, the weight of uncertainty giving way to grim determination. Even Banz's resistance softened, though his eyes warned of grudging acceptance rather than full trust. Meyer quickly gathered a handful of soldiers, those willing to follow her lead. She outlined the plan with clarity, emphasizing stealth and speed. The ravine was treacherous terrain, narrow and rocky, but it offered the element of surprise they desperately needed. As they prepared to move, Meyer's mind raced through every detail she'd memorized: the sharp turns, the hidden alcoves, the enemy's typical patrol patterns. This was more than a maneuver. It was a calculated gamble born from knowledge and courage. The team slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly and silently. Meyer took point, her senses heightened, every sound amplified in the stillness. The night was alive with danger, but also with possibility. As they descended into the ravine, the walls closed in, a narrow corridor carved by ancient waters. The rough stones scratched at their gear, and the air grew cooler, muffling distant sounds of battle. Meyer signaled for quiet, guiding her team with precise hand gestures. Suddenly, a faint noise, a shuffle, a whisper of movement, alerted Meyer. She froze, raising a finger to her lips. Ahead, a small enemy patrol moved cautiously, unaware of their proximity. Meyer's heart pounded, but her voice was a whisper. Hold fire. Let them pass. We can't afford to be seen. The patrol moved past, oblivious to the danger. The team resumed their advance, adrenaline sharpening their focus. Deeper into the ravine, the terrain grew steeper and more treacherous. Meyer's body ached from the strain, but her resolve only strengthened. Each step brought them closer to the enemy's flank, and to the chance to change the battle's course. Memories of her rigorous training surfaced again, the drills in low-light environments, the simulations of ambushes and flanking maneuvers. Those hours spent mastering tactics that now defined her leadership. The quiet soldier the platoon overlooked was, in truth, a strategist shaped by experience. As they neared the ravine's exit, Meyer signaled the team to halt. Ahead lay the enemy's rear lines, vulnerable and unsuspecting. This was the moment to strike. She gathered her small force, voice low but commanding. We hit fast and hard. Disrupt their formation, create chaos. Then we pull back and link up with the platoon. The soldiers nodded, faces set with determination. They checked their weapons, hearts steady despite the danger. The assault began with a sudden volley of gunfire, catching the enemy off guard. Meyer led the charge, moving with precision and purpose. Her team followed, striking swiftly into the flank, sowing confusion. Enemy fighters scrambled, firing wildly as Meyer's squad advanced. The air filled with shouts and the crack of rifles. Meyer's voice rose above the fray, rallying her team, coordinating movements with the calm of a seasoned commander. Despite the chaos, Meyer felt a surge of exhilaration. This was more than survival. It was defiance against doubt, proof of her worth. The quiet soldier was no longer sidelined. She was the spearhead of their counterattack. After several intense minutes, Meyer signaled retreat, pulling her team back through the ravine. The enemy, shaken and disorganized, faltered, giving the platoon precious breathing room. Back on the ridge, the platoon had rallied, inspired by the sudden shift in momentum. Even Sergeant Barnes, his usual scowl softened, acknowledged the impact of Meyer's bold move. Breathing hard, Meyer allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The risk had been immense, but so was the reward. She had defied orders, challenged prejudice, and led a daring assault that turned the tide. Yet, beneath the triumph lay a steely resolve. This was only the beginning. The battle raged on, and Meyer knew she would have to keep fighting, not just the enemy, but the doubts that lingered among her own ranks. As the desert night deepened, Sergeant Meyer Collins stood ready. Her past, her training, and her courage had converged in this moment. She was no longer just a quiet soldier. She was a leader, forged in fire, determined to protect her comrades and prove her worth, no matter the cost. The first light of dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain surrounding Forward Operating Base Crimson. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of smoke, the aftermath of the night's fierce exchanges still echoing in the tense quiet. Sergeant Meyer Collins crouched behind a scraggly bush atop the ridge, her eyes scanning the enemy lines that stretched below like a fractured web. The position, once teetering on the brink of collapse, now held a fragile promise of control. Her small team, battered but resolute, moved with cautious precision through the rocky ravine. The narrow corridor had become their path to turning the tide, a strategic artery weaving through hostile ground and unseen by their adversaries. Every step was deliberate, each breath measured against the sharp staccato of distant gunfire. Meyer's intimate knowledge of the landscape guided them like an unseen compass, her memory of the terrain a vital asset in the shifting chaos. Ahead, the enemy's patrols moved cautiously, unaware of the shadow weaving through their defenses. Meyer's hand rose, signaling for silence as the squad pressed closer, their movements blending with the whispering wind. The ravine's walls echoed the soft scrape of boots against stone, a delicate dance between stealth and urgency. The platoon's earlier ambush had evolved into a desperate gambit. Meyer's plan to flank through the eastern ravine was now the linchpin holding their defense together. The rugged terrain, once a hazard, had become their ally. She led them through tight turns and hidden alcoves, every step a testament to her tactical foresight. Despite the danger, Meyer's voice remained calm and clear, a beacon in the turmoil. Stay sharp. We're close. Suddenly, the crackle of movement from an enemy patrol ahead alerted the team. Meyer froze, eyes narrowing as she evaluated the situation. The patrol was small, just 4 soldiers, but their positioning threatened to expose the flanking maneuver. She raised a finger, signaling the team to hold. "Let them pass," as she whispered. "We can't afford to give away our position now." The patrol moved on, oblivious to the silent threat just behind them. The squad resumed their advance, adrenaline sharpening their senses. Myers' heart pounded, not from fear, but the electric rush of control in the storm of battle. As they neared the ravine's mouth, a sharp crack shattered the stillness. An enemy sentry had spotted them. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the rocky walls, and the team dove for cover. Myers' voice cut through the chaos, directing suppressive fire and coordinating their response with calculated precision. The assault was swift and brutal. Meyer led the counterattack, moving with the agility and focus that came from countless hours of training. Her team responded with disciplined aggression, their coordinated efforts disrupting the enemy's formation. Amid the firefight, Meyer's thoughts flickered to her past, the rigorous training that had prepared her for moments like this. Unconventional warfare tactics drilled into her until they became second nature, a silent strength beneath the surface of her quiet demeanor. The skills that had been dismissed by her platoon now defined her leadership. The enemy faltered, their lines breaking under the pressure. Meyer signaled her team to press the advantage, pushing through the ravine's exit to strike at the flank. Chaos rippled through the enemy ranks as the sudden attack sowed confusion and disarray. Back on the ridge, the platoon seized the opportunity. Inspired by Meyer's assault, they rallied with renewed vigor. Even Sergeant Barnes, whose skepticism had shadowed her every move, directed his men with a grudging respect. The tide of battle was shifting, slowly but surely. Meyer's heart swelled with a cautious hope. Her gamble had paid off, but the fight was far from over. The supply route remained a lifeline that must be secured at all costs. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the battered landscape, Meyer gathered her team behind the ridge. Her voice was steady, eyes burning with resolve. "We've disrupted their flank, but they'll regroup. We hold here. No one falls back." The soldiers nodded, faces grim but determined. The weight of exhaustion was heavy, but their spirits were buoyed by the small victories earned through courage and strategy. Meyer's gaze lingered on the horizon, where enemy forces stirred like a gathering storm. She knew the coming hours would test every ounce of their strength and willpower. Yet, beneath the tension, a quiet confidence took root, a belief born not just from training, but from the unyielding determination to protect those who depended on them. In the heart of the desert, amidst the dust and gunfire, Sergeant Meyer Collins had transformed from the underestimated soldier into a leader commanding respect through action and courage. Her knowledge of the terrain, her calm under pressure, and her unwavering resolve were carving a path through the chaos. The battle was far from won, but the first crucial step had been taken. The ridge was theirs, for now, and with it, a fragile hope that the supply route, and the lives tethered to it, might yet be saved. The sun had climbed higher now, beating down relentlessly on the rugged terrain surrounding forward operating Base Crimson. The early morning's fragile hope was quickly tempered by the harsh reality of battle. Enemy reinforcements were pouring in, their footsteps pounding like thunder across the desert floor. Sergeant Meyer Collins and her team braced themselves atop the ridge, the vantage point both a blessing and a curse, their shield and their target. The once narrow gap in the enemy's flank had closed, and the forces opposing them were better prepared, their movements more coordinated. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the metallic tang of gunfire. Meyer's body ached from exhaustion, every muscle screamed in protest, but her mind remained razor-sharp, focused on the task at hand. Ahead, enemy patrols scoured the ridges, their rifles sweeping methodically. Meyer's intimate knowledge of the terrain was tested as she guided her team through unexpected environmental challenges, loose rocks that threatened to betray their position, sudden drops hidden beneath sparse foliage, and narrow ledges that demanded careful footing. Every step was a calculated risk, every breath a negotiation with danger. "Watch your footing here," Emir whispered, signaling to Corporal Diaz as they navigated a crumbling outcrop. "One misstep and we're exposed." Diaz nodded, the tension evident in his tight grip on his weapon. The team moved silently, shadows among shadows, their nerves stretched thin but their resolve unbroken. Suddenly, movement flickered at the ridge's edge. A small enemy patrol emerged, rifles raised, scanning the terrain. Myers' pulse quickened, but she remained calm. With a subtle hand gesture, she directed her team to take cover behind jagged rocks. The patrol passed mere meters from their position, oblivious to the danger lurking so close. Meyer held her breath, heart pounding in her ears, until the soldiers disappeared over the ridge. As their pursuers vanished, Meyer's mind raced. The enemy was adapting quickly, and their reinforcements were growing in number and aggression. The platoon's position was becoming increasingly precarious. A sudden burst of gunfire shattered the tense silence. Meyer ducked instinctively as a bullet ricocheted off the stone beside her. The enemy had spotted them. "Return fire." "Suppressive," Meyer ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. The team responded immediately, rifles blazing as they sought to pin down the attackers. Meyer took point, moving with precision, her years of specialized training guiding her every decision. She led the return salvo with calculated bursts, aiming not only to repel but to disorient. Despite the onslaught, Meyer's courage shone through. She advanced through the rocky outcrop, rallying her team with steady commands and unyielding presence. The initial shock of the enemy's attack was met with disciplined resistance. But the challenges kept mounting. Enemy reinforcements arrived faster than anticipated, their numbers swelling. The terrain, once a strategic advantage, now presented deadly obstacles. Narrow ledges offered little room to maneuver, and the rocky slopes became treacherous underfoot. Maya found herself at the forefront of a fierce firefight, ducking behind cover as bullets tore through the air. She sustained a grazing wound to her arm but ignored the sting, focusing instead on keeping her team coordinated and alive. "Hold your positions. Don't give them an inch," as she shouted, voice hoarse but resolute. Her team, inspired by her bravery, dug in deeper. Even the soldiers who had doubted her before now fought with renewed determination, their faith in Meyer's leadership solidifying amidst the crucible of battle. The enemy pressed harder, launching wave after wave of assaults. Meyer's tactical adaptability was put to the test. She orchestrated tactical withdrawals, repositioning her team to avoid encirclement, and used the terrain's natural choke points to funnel enemy forces into kill zones. Each decision was a gamble against time and circumstance. A misstep could mean disaster, not just for Meyer and her team, but for the entire platoon relying on their hold of the ridge. Amid the relentless pressure, Meyer's thoughts flashed to the faces of her comrades, fatigued but unbroken, and to the stakes of their mission. The supply route was more than just a line on a map. It was the lifeline for the entire operation, the thread connecting them to reinforcements, supplies, and hope. As the sun climbed higher, the midday heat bore down mercilessly. Sweat stung Meyer's eyes, mixing with dirt and blood. Her body was taxed to its limits, but her mind remained clear, her leadership unwavering. "Reload and prepare for another wave," as she commanded. "We're not breaking." The enemy charged again, their assault fierce and desperate. Meyer led her team through a coordinated counterattack, exploiting a narrow defile to trap and repel the attackers. The firefight was brutal, echoes of gunfire reverberating across the rocky ridges. In the midst of battle, Meyer's voice rose above the chaos, rallying her exhausted soldiers. "We hold this ground. For the platoon. For each other," Her words were a lifeline, a spark igniting courage in tired hearts. Soldiers who had doubted her now fought fiercely alongside her, their unity forged in fire. But the cost was mounting. Casualties piled up, and the relentless pressure began to wear down even the strongest. Myers' arm throbbed with pain from the wound, but she refused aid, unwilling to show weakness in front of her team. As the enemy regrouped for yet another assault, Myers took a breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The battle for the ridge was far from over, and every decision, every moment of courage, was a step toward survival. In the blistering heat and swirling dust, Sergeant Myers Collins embodied resilience. Her tactical skill, her bravery under fire, and her unwavering commitment to her comrades transformed the tide, turning doubt into trust, hesitation into action. The ridge was a battleground, the stakes life and death. And Myers, once underestimated and dismissed, had become the steadfast heart of their defense. The battle had raged for hours, the desert sun casting harsh light on the battered landscape of forward operating Base Crimson. Amidst the swirling dust and echoing gunfire, Sergeant Myers Collins stood resolute, her eyes sharp and unyielding. The platoon's precarious hold on the ridge was a testament to grit and determination, but beneath the surface, a revelation was poised to shift the tides of perception. As the enemy's assaults waned under the platoon's fierce resistance, whispers began to circulate among the soldiers. Glances were exchanged, skepticism slowly giving way to reluctant admiration. Myers' tactical prowess and unwavering calm had not gone unnoticed. Yet, the full story of her capabilities remained hidden, until now. In a brief lull, Lieutenant Parker, the base's commanding officer, arrived at the ridge along with a small contingent of officers. The tension in the air was palpable as he surveyed the scene, his gaze settling on Myers. For the first time, his expression held more than mere formality, it bore the weight of recognition. "Sergeant Collins," Parker began, voice steady but carrying the gravity of command. "I've received reports from higher command about your actions tonight. Your leadership has been instrumental in holding this position." Myers met his gaze, wary yet composed. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my duty." Lieutenant Parker nodded, then lowered his voice. "I understand you have a background in reconnaissance. Can you elaborate?" A brief silence fell before Myers spoke, her tone measured. "Yes, sir. Before joining this platoon, I served with an elite reconnaissance unit. Specialized training in unconventional warfare, stealth, terrain analysis, tactical flanking maneuvers. Skills that have helped me navigate this battlefield." The revelation rippled through the gathered soldiers, many of whom had dismissed her as inexperienced. Sergeant Barnes, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier skepticism challenged by the truth. Lieutenant Parker's eyes scanned the platoon, then returned to Myers. "Your expertise explains the success of the flanking maneuver through the Eastern Ravine." It was a bold move that turned the tide. Myers nodded, acknowledging the compliment but remaining grounded. "It was a risk, sir. But one we had to take." Word spread quickly, and the platoon's perception began to shift. Soldiers who had once doubted Myers' abilities now looked to her with newfound respect. Her quiet demeanor was no longer mistaken for weakness but seen as a reflection of experience and composure under pressure. Sergeant Barnes approached Myers later, the tension between them easing. "I underestimated you," he admitted gruffly. "Your tactics saved us back there. I owe you that much." Myers accepted the acknowledgement with a nod. "We all want to get out of here alive, Sergeant." The platoon's unity strengthened, the cracks formed by doubt beginning to heal. Myers' revelation was more than a personal vindication. It was a catalyst for cohesion, a reminder that strength often lies beneath the surface. Lieutenant Parker convened a brief strategy session, incorporating Myers' insights into the defense plan. Her reconnaissance background provided critical information on enemy patterns and terrain vulnerabilities. The officers, once hesitant, now sought her counsel. As plans solidified, Meyer felt a quiet pride, not born of ego, but of purpose fulfilled. Her past, once hidden behind quiet reserve, had become an asset that saved lives and reshaped perceptions. The soldiers prepared for the next phase of battle with renewed determination, their trust in Meyer a steadying force. The desert wind carried the promise of survival, whispered through the ranks by a leader who had transformed doubt into strength. In the relentless crucible of war, Sergeant Meyer Collins had emerged not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of resilience and tactical brilliance. Her story was no longer a secret but a beacon, illuminating the path forward for a platoon united by courage and respect. The heat of midday pressed down on forward operating Base Crimson, the sun merciless as it burned through the thinning smoke and dust that hung over the battlefield. Sergeant Meyer Collins stood at the forefront of the ridge, her body battered and bruised, a fresh sting of pain radiating from a wound on her side. Sweat clung to her skin beneath the grime of battle, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. Around her, the platoon braced themselves, their weary faces etched with exhaustion yet lit by a spark of unyielding will. The enemy's encirclement had tightened, their forces pressing hard against the ridge, desperate to reclaim the supply route. Meyer knew this was the moment that would define the battle, and perhaps their very survival. The odds were against them, outnumbered and outgunned, but retreat was not an option. Her team was scattered, some tending to the wounded, others loading magazines and checking weapons. The air vibrated with tension, the distant thud of artillery punctuating the staccato of gunfire. Meyer's breathing was shallow but steady, her mind racing through every tactical option she had. "Sergeant Collins!" Corporal Diaz called out, urgency lacing his voice as he approached. "We're running low on ammo and medical supplies. We can't hold much longer." Meyer's jaw tightened, but she didn't waver. "Hold the line," as she ordered, voice firm. "We've come too far to fall now. We need to break their encirclement before it's too late." Her gaze swept the ridge, the rocky outcrops that had become their fortress. The enemy was massing on three sides, their numbers swelling like a tide threatening to engulf them. Meyer's mind flicked to the flanking maneuvers they had executed earlier, the ravine assault that had turned the tide, and to the hidden paths she had scouted in training. "We're going to hit them where they least expect," as she continued, voice low but resolute. "I'm leading a small team on a counterattack through the eastern pass. It's risky, but it's our best chance." The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. Sergeant Barnes, standing nearby, gave a curt nod. "You're crazy, Collins. But I'm with you." Meyer allowed herself a brief, grateful smile. "Good. We move fast and hard. No hesitation." She gathered her team quickly, Corporal Diaz, a few sharpshooters, and the most trusted soldiers who had proven themselves in the fighting. They checked their gear with practiced efficiency, the weight of their mission settling over them like armor. As they prepared to move, Meyer's thoughts flickered briefly to the faces of her comrades, those who had doubted her, those who now followed without question. The battle was no longer just about survival, it was about proving that courage and conviction could overcome any obstacle. The team slipped down the ridge into the narrow eastern pass, the terrain steep and treacherous. Dust and loose gravel shifted beneath their feet as they advanced, every step deliberate and silent. Meyer's eyes scanned the landscape, alert for enemy patrols or hidden dangers. The pass narrowed, funneling them into a deadly corridor. Enemy lookouts loomed ahead, rifles trained on the path. Meyer signaled for a halt, then crouched low, motioning for the sharpshooters to take position. With precise coordination, The sharpshooters opened fire, picking off sentries before alarms could be raised. The sudden assault sowed confusion among the enemy ranks, their formation faltering under the unexpected blow. Meyer led the charge, moving swiftly through the Paris with her team close behind. The sound of gunfire echoed off the rocky walls as the platoon's counterattack gained momentum. The enemy scrambled to regroup, but the element of surprise was on Meyer's side. Amidst the chaos, Meyer felt the sting of pain from her wound intensify, but she pushed it aside. The lives of her comrades depended on her strength, and she refused to falter. The counterattack surged forward, breaking the enemy's encirclement. Soldiers who had been trapped found new hope in the sudden shift, rallying to push back against the attackers. The supply route, once on the brink of collapse, was now a contested battleground. Back on the ridge, the platoon seized the opportunity. Reinforcements moved in, bolstered by the momentum of Meyer's assault. The enemy, caught off guard and disorganized, began to retreat, their hold on the area slipping away. Meyer, though exhausted and bleeding, pressed on. Her voice rose above the din, rallying her team and coordinating their movements with unyielding resolve. Every decision was a gamble, every step a battle against exhaustion and pain. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the enemy's resistance faltered. The once overwhelming force was broken, scattered by Meyer's daring assault and the platoon's relentless defense. Amid the fading light, Meyer allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. Blood seeped through her uniform, her body trembling from exertion and injury, but her spirit remained unbroken. Her team gathered around her, faces marked by fatigue but shining with triumph. Sergeant Barnes approached, his usual gruff demeanor softened by respect. "You did good, Collins. You saved us all today." Meyer met his gaze, a weary smile touching her lips. "We all did. Together." The battle for the supply route was won, but the cost was clear. The platoon had been pushed to their limits, tested in fire and shadow. Yet, through courage and leadership, they had prevailed. In that moment, Sergeant Meyer Collins was more than a soldier. She was a beacon of resilience, a testament to the power of determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Her actions would ripple through the ranks, inspiring those who had once doubted her and those who would follow in her footsteps. The fight was far from over, but the turning point had been reached. And as night fell over forward operating base Crimson, Meyer stood ready, wounded but unyielding, a warrior forged in the crucible of battle. The dust had barely settled over forward operating base Crimson when the murmurs began. Soldiers gathered in small clusters, voices hushed but charged with a new energy. Sergeant Meyer Collins, once dismissed as a liability, was now the focus of whispered admiration and cautious respect. Yet, amid the quiet celebrations, a storm of skepticism still lingered, threatening to overshadow the hard-won victories. In the makeshift command tent, Lieutenant Parker sat across from Meyer, the weight of command etched into his furrowed brow. The room was sparse, lit by flickering lanterns that cast long shadows on the canvas walls. Reports from the front lines had praised Meyer's leadership, but the chain of command was wary of the risks she had taken. Disobedience was not a light matter in the military. "Meyer," Parker began, his voice steady but edged with concern, "your actions were undeniably effective, but you disobeyed direct orders. That cannot be overlooked." Meyer met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, the orders were based on outdated information. Waiting would have meant certain defeat." The lieutenant sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I understand the situation called for boldness. But the military operates on discipline and order. We must balance initiative with obedience." The tension in the room was palpable. Meyer knew the cost of insubordination, yet she also understood the necessity of her choices. The lives saved, the the supply route secured, it was all proof that sometimes rules must bend in the face of reality. As the discussion unfolded, Sergeant Barnes entered the tent. His expression was hard to read, part grudging acceptance, part lingering doubt. He nodded curtly to Meyer. "You broke protocol. But I can't deny you saved us back there." Meyer's jaw tightened. "I did what was necessary." Bansi's eyes softened, a rare moment of vulnerability. "Maybe I misjudged you. Maybe we all did." Word spread quickly through the ranks. Meyer's story became a catalyst for change, challenging long-held prejudices and sparking conversations about leadership and trust. Soldiers who had once doubted her began to see her in a new light, a leader whose courage and tactical ingenuity had turned the tide. In the days that followed, Meyer was officially commended for her bravery and strategic acumen. Promotion orders arrived, elevating her to a position of greater responsibility. The recognition was bittersweet. It acknowledged her worth but also highlighted the obstacles she had overcome. The platoon's unity deepened. Meyer's actions served as a bridge, healing the fractures caused by doubt and mistrust. Sergeant Barnes, now an uneasy ally, worked alongside her to rebuild morale and focus on the mission ahead. Outside the command tent, Meyer stood beneath the harsh desert sun, the weight of new responsibilities settling on her shoulders. She was no longer the quiet soldier sidelined by skepticism. She was a leader commanding respect through action. Her thoughts drifted to the battles yet to come, the challenges that lay beyond the horizon. The war was far from over, and the price of courage was high. But Meyer was ready, her resolve tempered by experience, her vision clear. As the platoon prepared for the next deployment, Meyer took a moment to reflect on her journey. The doubts, the dismissals, the battles, each had forged her into the soldier she was today. Her story was no longer just her own. It was a testament to resilience and the power of perseverance. The desert wind stirred, carrying with it the promise of new challenges and new victories. Sergeant Meyer Collins stood poised to face them all, a symbol of strength rising from the ashes of doubt. The sun hung low over the desert horizon, casting long shadows across forward operating base Crimson as Sergeant Meyer Collins stood at the edge of the encampment, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains where the next mission awaited. The battle-scarred landscape behind her whispered of sacrifice and survival, but ahead lay a new chapter, uncharted and demanding. The weight of her recent promotion settled on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of responsibility she was ready to bear. Word of Meyer's heroism had rippled through the military community, spreading beyond the confines of the base. Soldiers who had once doubted her now spoke her name with respect, inspired by a story that defied expectation. Her journey from underestimated recruit to decisive leader became a beacon for those often overlooked or marginalized, a testament to resilience and the quiet strength that can change the course of battle. In the command tent, preparations for the new deployment buzzed with energy. Maps sprawled across tables, radios crackled with updates, and soldiers moved with purpose. Meyer's presence commanded attention, not through words alone, but through the aura of someone who had faced fire and emerged stronger. Lieutenant Parker approached, nodding with approval. "Sergeant Collins," he said, voice steady, "your leadership has reshaped this platoon. They're ready for what lies ahead because of you." Meyer acknowledged him with a firm nod. "We're all ready, sir. We've learned that strength comes from unity and trust." As the sun dipped further, bathing the desert in hues of orange and gold, Meyer took a moment to reflect. The road to this point had been fraught with challenges, skepticism from peers, rigid command structures, and the relentless pressures of combat. Yet each obstacle had forged her resolve, sharpening her skills and deepening her commitment. She thought of Corporal Diaz, whose quiet faith had bolstered her in critical moments, and Sergeant Barnes, whose grudging respect had evolved into genuine support. Their transformations mirrored her own, proof that courage and perseverance could break down the walls of prejudice and doubt. Beyond the immediate mission, Meyer envisioned a future where stories like hers would inspire change, a military that embraced diverse talents and valued strength in all its forms. She knew her journey was part of a larger movement, a step toward redefining what it meant to be a warrior. The night air grew cooler, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant campfires. Meyer's eyes traced the constellations above, finding solace in their steady glow. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new battles, but also new opportunities to lead and to protect. Her thoughts settled on the soldiers who would follow her lead, young men and women seeking purpose and belonging in a world often hostile to difference. Meyer was determined to be the leader who not only fought alongside them but opened doors for those who came after. As the stars emerged, casting silver light over the rugged terrain, Sergeant Meyer Collins stood poised on the cusp of a new mission. Her story, a tapestry woven from doubt, courage, and redemption, would continue to unfold, inspiring those who dare to believe in the power of resilience. In the stillness of the desert night, her legacy took root, a reminder that true strength often lies in the unexpected, and that the most powerful warriors are those who rise when it matters most, regardless of their past or the doubts of others.